Okay, so this is video 3 in the series, lesson 2 really, the exposure triangle. Now, we call it the exposure triangle because there are 3 elements that make up, that's 3, that was a triangle. There are 3 elements that allow you as the photographer to control what hits the sensor or the film of your camera, how much light is let in and how much light is blocked. The 3 sides of the exposure triangle are ISO, which doesn't stand for anything, it literally is just ISO, or ISO, doesn't matter how you pronounce it. F-stop or aperture, they're the same thing. They basically mean how wide or tight the hole in the lens is. And there is shutter speed, how quickly the shutter goes past the lens, letting light in. Now, the reason we call them a triangle is because they all control the amount of light that goes in. So, essentially, if you have an image and you're happy with the exposure, as in you're happy with how bright it is, you can change those settings around but keep the brightness exactly the same. So if you shorten the shutter speed so that the camera, if the shutter goes past faster, you let light in. But you can open up the aperture so that you let more light in that way and you can achieve exactly the same image. So we often refer to the elements on the exposure triangle as stops of light. It's a silly term, but it's the one that you'll come across, so it's worth learning what it means. So stops of light are how much light you're letting in. So you can measure the shutter speed in stops of light, you can measure the ISO in stops of light, and you can measure the f-stop or the aperture in stops of light. So if you add 2 stops of light from the aperture and you take 2 stops of light away via the shutter speed, you'll get the same exposure. Equally, if you add 2 stops of light via the shutter speed and you take away 2 stops of light from the ISO, you will get the same exposure. And there are reasons why you might want one side of the triangle to be letting in more light than another, but that's another lesson. I'm going to go through each side of the exposure triangle separately so that you can understand them. Once you understand all 3 sides of the exposure triangle, you will be able to shoot any camera in manual mode. Manual mode is the mode in which you control all 3 sides of the exposure triangle. Now, even modern smartphones, most of them will allow you to shoot in manual mode. Now, they may call it pro mode or professional mode, but it's the same thing. It allows you to control all 3 sides of the exposure triangle. Now, it's very tempting when you get a new camera to start shooting what are called the semi-automatic modes, where the camera takes care of some elements for you. But actually, those modes, the semi-automatic modes, are really useful, but you can usually only make the best of them if you understand how to shoot manual first, so you can make the right choice for which mode you want to let the camera take care of automatically. So the first lesson in the exposure triangle series is coming up in a second. You will find a link to it up here if it's already online. If it's not online, there's nothing there yet. Subscribe to the channel to be updated when the next lessons come online, especially if there's nothing there yet. And up here you will find a playlist of all the lessons so far that you can work your way through in order.